Hi, folks, and welcome to another episode of Health Talk from Mars. It's out of this world. In today's topic, I want to cover a topic that is intimately connected to genetically modified foods, and that is glyphosate, the toxicant that was created by Monsanto. So stay tuned. In today's episode, I want to talk about glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active constituent of Roundup Ready. Glyphosate is connected specifically to genetically modified foods. So today I'm going to talk about exactly how glyphosate fits in, where it comes from, how it's being used today, and what the effects are, and what you can do to mitigate the symptoms that are associated with glyphosate exposure. Okay, so glyphosate was a compound that was first discovered in 1958 by a Japanese researcher who found that it was extremely toxic to all plants. It was toxic to plants because it poisoned what's called the shikimate pathway. The shikimate pathway is a pathway in which plants synthesize some essential amino acids: phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. So the plants can't survive without those essential amino acids, and neither can humans for that matter. So this particular Japanese researcher decided that this compound, because it was water soluble, was too dangerous to get out into the environment. So it basically got shelved for a number of years until Monsanto decided, hey, this is a spectacular herbicide, kills everything. I think that people could really use this in their home, in their gardens, and all around their house. So that's when in 1973 they came out with this commercial during the Super Bowl where a guy comes out of the garage door opens, he's got two pistols on two holsters on either side of him, draws up his little pistols, goes out to his driveway, and sprays the dandelions that are growing between the cracks of the cement. So that was a very successful commercial, and the sales of glyphosate or Roundup Ready went up rather dramatically. However, this was just the very beginning. So Monsanto, in its amazing thought pattern, said, hey, what if we genetically modify a particular plant that basically can resist the effects of glyphosate? Because all other plants basically die when they get exposed to glyphosate. So they said, okay, let's do this experiment. So they first came out in 1994 with the Flavor Saver tomato. The Flavor Saver tomato was like a baseball. Basically, it was hard, not very juicy. And needless to say, the consumer, the whole idea was basically you could ship these tomatoes, they wouldn't get damaged during the shipping, they would last forever, except for one couple of small items, and that was one, they tasted terrible, and two, they were like baseballs. They weren't like a regular tomato. Okay, next up in 1996 comes soybeans. Genetically modified soybeans. So they came up with these soybeans, and basically soybeans were being used in many, many foods around the world. And Monsanto thought, hey, if we get this genetically modified soybean to grow, and then we have this herbicide, glyphosate, that we could spray, kills all the weeds around it except for the genetically modified soy plant, we will make a bundle. So that was the very beginning of genetically modified crops being used commercially, and that would be the soybean. Next up was corn, and then came canola, and then came cottonseed. Cottonseed actually is used as an oil in various types of foods. You can see it on labels. Shouldn't really be permitted to be used in foods because it's not as regulated as other food products like soy and corn. So what's the problem with using glyphosate on these plants? Well, as I mentioned, glyphosate actually kills plants by stopping the synthesis of 3 essential amino acids: tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. These amino acids are specifically used in human physiology to create various types of hormones. Cortisol is really important, adrenal hormone that's important for your mind and important for nerve conduction. So tryptophan, as we know, has been used in the treatment of depression and sleep disorders. It is the precursor to serotonin. So when you block the synthesis of these amino acids and you kill the plant and then you eat that plant, you're going to be consuming a plant that's low on in these particular essential amino acids. Not a good thing if you have mood disorder or if you have depression or Alzheimer's disease or autism. Any number of neurological disorders can be linked to the possible consumption of this glyphosate. So when they spray glyphosate, as we mentioned, it's a water-soluble herbicide. So it tends to get everywhere. When it's sprayed, less than 1% actually goes onto the crops that it's designed to kill, that is the weeds. Most of it goes into the groundwater. And when it goes into the groundwater, it then goes up into the atmosphere and eventually comes down as rain. So even if you're not using glyphosate and you're having organic crops, the rainwater is actually contaminated with glyphosate. So they spray about 4.5 billion pounds across the world, mostly in foods to feed animals. And that would be soy and corn and canola. So not good. That's not something that we want to see. One spraying of glyphosate in a field will actually kill half of all the earthworms in the ground. So that's not a good thing. That should be the canary in the cave. Definitely not something that you want to be consuming on a daily basis. So they spray 4.5 million pounds of glyphosate around the world today. In Europe, they've essentially banned most of the use of glyphosate because they know better. So an interesting phenomenon is that the 97% of all soybeans grown in the United States are genetically modified. 55% of those genetically modified soybeans are actually shipped to China to feed their chickens and other livestock. Not a good thing. The United States then imports genetically modified soybeans from Brazil to feed our livestock. Somehow, people are making money off of those deals. I don't know all the particulars, but just say that something dubious is happening there. So, what do we know about glyphosate when you ingest glyphosate? Well, we know that glyphosate can affect the enterocytes of your intestinal cells. Your intestinal cells, the enterocytes, is a very, very thin layer, about half the thickness of a strand of hair. And that tiny thickness of those cells is basically, prevents stuff from going from the intestinal tract into our bloodstream. And it does so with an amazing amount of bodily physiology, which includes various antibodies and a mucus layer on top of those enterocytes. So in the consumption of glyphosate, what we see is that the cells of the intestinal tract, they normally have these junctions. They're sort of held together, kind of like a puzzle. And those little junctions that hold those cells together become loosened or damaged when they're exposed to glyphosate. When that happens, what we see is those tight junctions drawing apart, and it causes these holes in the intestinal tract. And they're tiny holes, but they're big enough to allow certain food components to get through. So normally the intestinal cells are very selective in what they allow to come through. When you start letting larger protein molecules get through these tight junctions, they can stimulate an immunological response that can cause autoimmunity, cancer, heart disease, diabetes. I mean, you name the disease, it could be linked to. So we know that 90% of the serotonin produced in the body is produced in the intestinal tract, and that's due to the microbiome. So we know that glyphosate can also damage the microbiome. So in addition to causing a stretching out or damaging of those tight junctions, it could also damage your microbiome. Not something that you really want to see. So the microbiome is really a critical component of our immune system. And we see today, especially with COVID and other viral infections, that people are much more susceptible to these viral infections if they also are having an immunological response to their tight junctions and to the damage of their microbiome. What can we do to stop this phenomenon from happening? One, we know that the vast majority of glyphosate is being spread onto crops to feed animals. So the more of a plant-based diet that you can do, the less you're going to be consuming glyphosate. So that's a good thing. So the other thing that we need to be aware of is that there are certain nutrients that can protect us against those tight junctions from separating apart. So I created an antioxidant formula called OxyQuench Ultra with tocotrienols that will actually protect those tight junctions from being damaged. Another product that I developed is called Dr. Hubbard's Healing Formula, which is a formula specifically designed to heal the gut. It's made of demulcents. Those are herbs specifically that actually heal and protect those endothelial cells, epithelial cells, and the enterocytes of your digestive tract. So you can look this up on marznutrition.net and you can check out these products. And that's all I have for you today in today's episode. So thank you for joining, and I want to invite you to my future episodes. If you have anything you would like to hear, you can state that down in the comments below. And check out my website, marznutrition.net, for further information. And thanks for listening, and over and out.